The Society for Culture and Environment extends a warm welcome. You are watching a session titled Containing China from the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, January 2020. We have with us Mr. Pradip Baijal, an officer of the Indian Administrative Service who retired as a chief of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. He has held several senior administrative positions in the Ministry of Finance and Industries. He will be in conversation with Mr. Shivshankar Menon, who served as National Security Advisor of India. He was Foreign Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs and Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Ambassador to China and Israel. We also have with us Mr. Ashok Kumar Bhattacharya, who is currently the Editorial Director of Business Standard. He is a member of the Track 2 Strategic Dialogues between India and China and between India and Singapore.
Welcome to this cold early morning to all of you. We are here today to discuss a really wonderful and unique book called Containing the China Onslaught by Pradip Baijal. A book that I would very strongly recommend to everyone because there is no other book like this. There's no other book which actually combines a deep analysis of how China managed to do what she did, which is unprecedented in history, to become a middle-income country within 30 years, from a level where in 1980 at least both the Indian and the Chinese economies were roughly equal. But also of its implications for the rest of the world, the politics, the geopolitics, the diplomacy, and what India should do about it. So it's a book from an Indian point of view of the most significant development that's happening in our neighborhood and probably in global politics in the last 30 years. Which is why I think it's a book that must be read, because it's a deep book. It's not a quick read, but it is a read that is well worth undertaking. But before we start bombarding him with our questions, Ashok and I thought maybe we should listen to you and ask you to describe the book and tell people basically what I'm trying to say. Please read it.
Thank you, Shivshankar. I hope that book will sell more with your endorsement. But let me take you away from it and discuss some issues in general. How do things change? And that is the primary subject of this book. How do things change? In the year 1 AD, up to 1800 AD, the world did not change. The overall GDP for 1800 years was the same. And the country shares of their GDP were also the same. 1800 years. Things didn't change because there was no technology which could change things. There was no large trade, and the interaction of one country with another was less. But in 1800, a revolution came, and that revolution came in England, the first industrial revolution, 1760 if you recall, and the textile mills came in England, also in Europe, and GDP started changing. India and China, please remember these numbers, India and China were 50% of the world's GDP. 50% of the world's GDP, Sone ki Chidiya, etc., was India and China. Out of that 50%, India and China, 25, one way or the other, nothing happened in the world. And the first technology revolution changed England. Of course, colonial rule was also a cause. England, 1% to 6% in about 70 years. Then came the second industrial revolution. The second industrial revolution was the Ford Motor Company assembly lines. And the cars went from one to another and you started with the frame and the car came out at the other end. That technology changed the United States from 5% to 35% in about 100 years. First industrial revolution, second industrial revolution. So, between 1800 and 1950, India and China became 50% to 5%. And US became from 5% to 35%, UK became from 1% to 6%. The impact of technology only. These technologies were discovered in UK, these technologies were discovered in the United States. And then came 1950 and the third industrial revolution came. That industrial revolution, the technology was discovered in the US, it was discovered in Europe, but the benefit came to India and China. Now, this was a miracle. Three factors. One, the book on globalization by Jagdish Bhagwati. It has been described by Jagdish Bhagwati, globalization. Because the world started interacting heavily. Second, the technology came on the wire or the wireless. It was a telecommunications technology. So you couldn't hold the technology to your end of the wire because if it was useful, the message must go to the other end also. So globalization and connectography, described by Parag Khanna of the Singapore University, was to the disadvantage of the advanced world, and that's what Jagdish Bhagwati has also said, and lots of economists said, no, Jagdish Bhagwati doesn't understand. Now, it was this globalization which led to the technology being used by India and China, and those fellows, even though they used the technology, it didn't benefit them so much. Now, the third factor, and that's a factor which I should not be speaking on, he should be speaking on, and that factor is the naivety of the US presidents. The first such president was Nixon. Now, when in 1950, Mao, sitting in a way in Beijing, because they were not connected anywhere, they got independent. India also got independent, 1950. Both these countries, the colonial rule stopped, you could think for yourself. And both the countries could make their own plans. So Mao made his own plans. They have been beautifully described in this book by Michael Pillsbury. The book is The 100-Year Marathon. So he prepared a 100-year marathon. And he was very ambitious. So he prepared a marathon, Red Guard in control, New Deal, etc., etc. And in 20 years, China collapsed. Because there was no technology in these plans. When China collapsed, they had two famines. Millions of people died. India, of course, conservative country, got hold of Russia, and Russia started guiding India, and you had a Hindu rate of growth of 3%. But it was a rate of growth which went on, but China collapsed. When China collapsed, Mao talked to his people, what should I do? And who is the best in the world in GDP growth? And Mao was told the best in the world is United States of America. So they said, contact them. So he contacted them, and Kissinger told Nixon, don't touch the Chinese. Now, no one knew of these dialogues till about a few years back, when the United States, after 35 years of that dialogue between Mao and Nixon, the famous dialogue of 1972 in Beijing, So they declassified all the documents. Some of the documents I have accepted in the book. Now, so Kissinger said nothing to him. He won't touch China. They are very undependable people. But Nixon didn't understand everything very well. That is what led to Watergate. So Nixon said, no, we must. But no one was prepared. So he got in touch with his friend Lee, himself a native Chinese, and said, go and influence Nixon. So Lee was an intellectual, so he wrote an article and presented that article to Nixon. Nixon read the article, liked it very much, and like all big people, Nixon published that article in his own name in the magazine Foreign Affairs, the US book. All this is in those papers, no, not literally, the secret papers to be classified in 2015. And I was lucky that when I started writing the book, I got hold of these papers because they had come on the net from the Nixon library. So, this article said that it is in the interest of US to grow. It is in the interest of US to acquire a major population in the American bloc. So, acquire China in the American bloc or acquire India in the American bloc, huge population. So the American industry will grow. And Nixon understood it halfway and said yes. 1968, he suddenly won the election. When he won the election, since the article was written in his name, it became official policy. But again, Kissinger, etc., they didn't agree to this policy. But the American corporate liked the policy that our market will grow. And Nixon also went with the American corporate without understanding. And there was discussion, but nothing was happening. So, Mao mentioned to his friend Adenoid and some other world leaders, and also Yahya Khan, who was the Pakistan chief. And he said, please help. So they went and met Nixon that you must help. Huh? Yes. So that's why I said he should talk about it. So when these people agreed, so Nixon implemented the policy. 1968, after Nixon won the election. But Mao was very keen. He was a great deceiver because deception is the art of the Chinese, 36 stratagems, etc. How do you make a fool of the other person? So, when Mao was approached by Yahya Khan, Mao said no, because the article was not in his name. He said no. For 5 years, the Americans pursued with China that let us have a meeting, and the meeting took place in 1972. And when first Kissinger went in Yahya Khan plane in the name of Bangladesh war, etc., to Beijing surreptitiously. Another very interesting thing happened. Mrs. Gandhi fixed the Americans in the Bangladesh war. And Nixon felt that he got fixed when the 7th Fleet of the USA was stopped by the Russian fleet. So that strengthened Nixon's belief that we must fix Russia. They are dangerous people. They have taken the satellite. We have not been able to take the satellite. Americans are having an inferiority complex, and then the meeting took place. When the meeting took place, it's interesting to read the records of that meeting. In that meeting, Chow and Lai and another gentleman out of that group said Indira Gandhi is a bitch. So the other fellow said, no, she's a bitch. Now it's recorded there in those papers. And when this happened, Chow and Lai laughed loudly, written in those papers. So when all this took place, Mao knew that the deal is done. And Nixon went back and the deal was done primarily on account of Nixon's allergy to Indira Gandhi. So I have said that the Chinese growth is basically a result of providence, deception, of Of course, technology. Technology in the reverse, starting from the third industrial revolution. And now we are up with the fourth industrial revolution and the fifth industrial revolution. The first and the second industrial revolutions were on a different wire, were on a different medium. The third industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, the fifth industrial revolution are all on wire or wireless. They are all on software. Now we started calling that software. It's no longer software. It's the software. It's known as there's another word for that software, which basically comes out of data. My goodness, you should do the talk. I always thought that he was an expert. You look at his postings, and any IAS officer will understand that he had the best postings on earth. So, everyone is, so that's why I said, if China had providence in their favor, you also have providence in your favor. So when
No
this,
deceit.
huh?
No deceit.
I have not said it. but so this started, and again lots of people resisted, both in China and in the United States. And in China, because of all this, Deng went to jail. He went to jail for 2 years. One of his brothers was killed. His son was handicapped. Itna mara usko. And this fellow remained in jail with his wife for 2 years. And he saw no future for himself. So that is also providence, that he was in jail. Again providence, 1976, Mao died. When Mao died, 74 or 76, 76 Mao died, and then the Gang of Four appeared, and the Chinese people thought, ki mar gaye, ye kya Gang of Four aa gaya hai? So they got rid of the Gang of Four and suddenly appointed Deng almost out of jail to president. And so he became, Deng became president, actually, general secretary there. Now, this is Machiavelli. Machiavelli said in 1500 AD, and I have quoted that in the book, that if you try to change anything, then you have to go to jail. You have to be persecuted. And I feel very thrilled when the Congress government, they couldn't prosecute me, they persecuted me for 4 years by sending the CBI teams, etc., newspapers coming, that I was going to be arrested, etc., etc. So I consider myself as a mini Deng. And Deng not only went to jail once, Deng went to jail twice. Second time he went to jail after he had converted China into the most powerful country in the world, and he had retired and he had done Tiananmen, etc., etc. Then he was almost executed, but I'll go to that story later, that even a person like Deng can be treated in that manner by an Asian country, so we are no exception in India. Now, let me come back to the story. When this started, Kissinger told Deng that we must have democracy, and second, he said that we must have more freedom. And Deng said, all right, and he tried. When he tried, he could not control China because he started weakening the Communist Party. So he went to Kissinger and said, look, Russia has collapsed. The Great Eastern Bloc has collapsed because of democracy. So don't force democracy in China. The world will become uncontrollable. You remember the times Czechoslovakia, Russian states, Ukraine, etc. So he went and told Nixon, don't force this. And they didn't force change in democracy till 1989. And this process started in 1972. They didn't force democracy. So another deception. And I called it a judo trick. In the US. Second, they said, we'll give you the Chinese market. They didn't give them the Chinese market. What they gave them was spaces in China, and places for American corporates to come and invest. When American corporates did that, two things happened. One, the American factories got closed. Not only did American factories get closed, all over the world the factories got closed and all the factories went to China. So, typical deception, no market, only space to invest and a highly disciplined labor which gave maximum output. But and then the Chinese committed theft of all the technology. But even then they had problems. So they said, make us a part of WTO. And they put in an application. Same time, Russia also put in an application for WTO. China became a member of WTO after breaking all the rules in 2001, courtesy US policy and US influence. Russia became member of WTO in 2012. The graphs are here. And Russia didn't grow. And the entire world collapsed because a billion labor joined the WTO. And then they started committing theft. There were IPR thefts. I was lucky. My secretary in TRI, by the name of Harshvardhan Singh, your friend, became the Deputy Director General of WTO. And I told him, what have you done? So he said, I didn't realize. Again, Chinese deception. Because Chinese did not let them believe that they would do this. But they did their deception and they committed thefts from all over the world. Now the WTO has come up to a position. The WTO may have been closed down yesterday. If they closed down, the Americans had not approved the deadline. So is WTO closed down? So, yes. So, yeah, it will be closed. So that is the Chinese deception and the Chinese influence, because Chinese have been working for it. ये बहुत फायदा उठा लिया, अब तो सारे को बंद ही कर दो. So that is what is happening. And and one thing I find in a lot of meetings like this in India also, I find a lot of supporters of the Chinese method of doing the governance. There's a lot of jugaad in India also. If we also join the Chinese way, we will also rise like China, which is that you do your paimani in WTO and you do deception all over the place. But the world is changing. And why the world is changing? The world is changing because the roads have become useless. What is useful today is the wire or the wireless. And that wire or wireless from 2G became 3G, became 4G, and is today 5G. I had promised myself that I never talk of telecom, because I worked in telecom for a long time. But this I have to say, that today the roads have become wireless and different countries are going ahead in different directions in developing that road. China has a lot of surplus funds and they have invested a lot of money. Hawaii was a big issue. They have been able to sort out Hawaii, good or bad. I am not an expert in that area. But the world is going in one direction. The only advantage that I see in India, which I have called Indian providence in this book, is that India was very good in software. India is very good in algorithms. So Raul Paul, a famous investor of the West, has said, JAM has done what to India? Narendra Modi has done JAM to India, and here and after, India will grow at a huge pace. Now, what happened after the first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution? There was disruption in the manufacturing processes. All of us know that 3G, 4G, 5G, IR3, IR4, IR5 are very disruptive technologies and very fast technologies. Things are disappearing from the market. Like for instance, the discs have disappeared. Like for instance, Kodak has disappeared. So, these disruptive technology will change things very fast. Come back to China. China was below India in GDP till 1990. It was at par with India in about 2000. It was almost in the same league as India till about 2005. 2005, please mark my words. 2005. And the proof, the famous banker Goldman Sachs did a study. I went and released the report in the United States, in their head office. When the report said that India, China, Russia, BRICS, all these countries are at par as far as growth potential is concerned. Absolute nonsense. Even Goldman Sachs was fooled by the Chinese because Chinese had basically invested in infrastructure. So the growth was slow, no one noticed it in the world. Even Goldman Sachs didn't know the amount of money that had gone in. And Deng's policy was growth with folded hands. Then came Xi. Xi's policy is not growth with folded hands. The moment he came, his ambassador in the United States said, "We are too powerful, no one can touch us." So that is Xi's policy, and I hope he suffered on account of that, because China has led to a lot of enmities in the world because of Xi's policy. They had appointed, I told him that there was an ambassador designate, so he immediately corrected me. No, he was not ambassador designate, Ashley Tellis. He came to a Bangalore meeting and said in that meeting that we have to take Chinese help to develop the rest of the world. So we have to smother them with kindness. I have given that speech in my book. Thank God Trump came, and Trump said he's a fool and did not appoint him as the American ambassador in India. Because the first president who recognized all this was Trump. Till about, from Nixon to Obama, there were 8 presidents who were continuously befooled by the Chinese. There was another interesting part, and that's my last, that Deng's term came to an end in 1987. And at that time, this 10-year rule was there, and it takes very long to change the rules in China. Now they have changed it in favor of Xi because of the experience with Deng. So Deng had to go. But by this time, Maslowian tendencies had come in China. Maslowian tendencies is that when you get rich, you ask for more freedom. So Maslowian tendencies had come in, and there were minor protests of youngsters in China. And they were very minor protests. I have prepared a book on this, which is on Getty Images. And I was going to put those images in my book. When Menon said, कि मर जाओगे, ऐसे करोगे, they recover lakhs and lakhs from you, so I didn't do it. But that book is available with me. If anyone gives me an email, I'll send that book, which is China's Growth in Pictures. There, you see that this was a very harmless kind of an agitation. But then realized that if Politburo then, which is the master in China, Politburo realized that if this agitation catches up, then China will be finished, because all the labor was regimented labor, it will no longer be regimented. So, number one, they appointed Deng as defense minister, because they couldn't appoint him as prime minister, and he joined as defense minister, and then he had meetings with the generals, and 29th June 1989 or some date, there were these tanks which came in and 30,000 people were killed. First they said 200 people, but then the entire country got to know that 30,000 people were killed. And 34th, 36th and I think the 32nd battalions of the Chinese army revolted. When this happened, Politburo again had to find a scapegoat. And they identified Deng as the scapegoat. And there were news that Deng will be executed. Now imagine Deng executed, God being executed. So Deng was too sharp for these guys. So he spoke to Bush, who was then the president, कि मुझको बचाओ. And I don't know why, but Bush agreed to save him. And he wrote him a letter. The letter said that I'll never support you publicly, but I sympathize with you. What you did was correct. Now imagine a US president writing a letter on something he said I never accept in public space. So there is something wrong. I have tried to give some explanation, but since there is no authoritative writing, that explanation is only my explanation. So then got saved because of Bush's letter, and the agitation, the agitation in Tiananmen was started by CIA. It's all recorded there, especially in these papers. Now, when I was reading this, I looked at a similar agitation in India. And lots of people here will not like my statement, but since it is already in the book, I have tried to compare the Tiananmen Square killings with the Kashmir exodus. And I hope he will react very positively or very negatively on this. Because I said that both the countries had started growing in 1990. Both the countries had some problems here, there. To my mind, the biggest problem was the Kashmir exodus. And I had mentioned this to some of your friends in the media. And they have said, no, we are too big a country, we can have a Muslim state in India. And I found that highly irresponsible. Because it is the Kashmir exodus which changed the mindset of this country from an earlier known secularism to a Hindutva. Because everyone said, no, these Congress walas can't save us. वो तो हमारा है, हमारे घर से Hindu exodus करा देंगे. And therefore the entire psyche changed because of the Kashmir exodus, and that's the comparison between China and India. And the result was that I have given the graph. China today is 5 times India, from 1:1 India and China, because of all these developments. And second, US is the same GDP as China today, and it is growing very fast. And that is the story today.
Ashok, you want to say something quick?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, we want it to be a conversation, so instead of the author talking. So I think the book is also very interesting and worth reading because I think the India angle comes out very eloquent, and therefore, and the author makes a very interesting point that why India could not achieve its full potential. And correct me, Mr. Baijal, if I'm misinterpreting you. Because China had the advantage of a kind of a political regime where continuity in policy could be ensured, whereas in India, the cost of democracy is that policies can often be flip-flopped. So deriving from that thesis of yours, my question to you, and if you can enlighten us, is are we sort of already past this thing? So you can give another brief answer there. What are the things that India should be apprehensive about in drawing from China? There's a couple of things that you have.
No, I will straight answer. Sure. For 70 years, you have a temporary provision in Kashmir. For 70 years, you have a temporary provision. There is no long-term policy. You read this book. In China, Mao had this 100 years marathon divided into 5 years, and every 5 years, depending on what I have achieved, I changed the 5 years. But the 100 years never went wrong. That was not allowed to go wrong. In India, people are saying today, and I am very surprised, that you have taken this temporary provision after 70 years, and Narendra Modi is being criticized for that. So that is the psyche of it.
Well, I think we've run across our time, but you can see how many issues there are here in this book, which not only can be debated, but are actually of interest to us all. I think the real parallel for what happened in Kashmir is really Xinjiang in China. And if you look at the effects of that, that's still playing itself out, just as Kashmir is also still playing. But there are just so many issues here. What India should do, China's prospects, where will it go now? Can it sustain what it's doing? And all those are in the book. So, frankly, either you come outside and we'll continue this discussion, but also
you have got 10 more minutes, not an issue.
You've given us a little time? Then, in that case, I also have a question for you. how long do you think China will go on as she is? Because in some places in the book you leave the impression that you think China will be the global dominant hegemon. My own feeling, and for what it's worth, is that demography is against China, her geography is against her. She's in a very crowded neighborhood with other countries rising, like India. She's surrounded by Japan, India, Korea, etc. And the reactions are already there. And she has internal stresses. I don't think, China spends more on internal security than she does on national defense today. Until 2015, they used to publish the number of what they called mass incidents, which is protests by over 1,000 people. But when that number crossed 200,000 in 2015, they stopped publishing the number. Which suggests to me that this is not a society at peace with itself. So it's going to be domestically preoccupied, doesn't have the luxury of the US of sitting behind two of the world's largest oceans, and even today cannot project power globally, can do it in Asia. In fact, we are the neighbors and therefore we see it in our periphery all the time. But I'm not so sure that this is a done deal, that Belt and Road and that China is tomorrow's US. But where do you think it's going?
Can I add to that point? I'll add to that point and say that how realistic and sensible is the Chinese policy to set a target of 2025 to achieve dominance, global dominance in areas which themselves are evolving so rapidly, thanks to technology, the point that you mentioned. Automobile, what kind of automobiles are they talking about? 2025, global 45%. Yeah, what will the mobile artificial intelligence perhaps itself will go into a different phase. So, in a rapidly technologically evolving society and economy, is it a good policy to set a target 2025, we will do this? We will say it's fine, things have passed you by. So that's the question.
The last two chapters deal with that precisely. You see, the Chinese government runs by the egos of the Secretary General and by the egos of the Politburo. And they have set targets for themselves. 2025, for instance, they have said we will acquire primacy in this area, this area, this area. Now, if they acquire primacy in those areas, the rest of the world would not be required to work. Because if you see the earlier chapter, 80% of the world's computers are being manufactured in China. When Trump really tightened the screws, these 80% will not sell. There are many commodities, there many products are mentioned in the book where they cannot survive without international markets. And when the international markets start misbehaving, China will collapse. And it was this collapse which prompted them to design BRI. But BRI is being opposed even in the captive state of Pakistan. There are agitations against BRI. And BRI is totally unethical. The first country which started opposing BRI is India, perhaps thanks to people like Shivshankar in the Foreign Service, who understood, none of the advisors of Trump understood this, and we started opposing BRI. So there are many pointers to how the Chinese are failing, and they will fail. And I have read some books by Tarun Khanna, a professor in Harvard, who has been saying for the last 30 years that the next country which will grow enormously is India. And I have asked Tarun Khanna, what nonsense, such a confused country we are. But he says, you will see, the democracy prevails everywhere. So read that Tarun Khanna's book.
So can we open it for question answer?
So can we open it for the question for the crowd, for the audience? Yes.
I have a question. So, I was just wondering, whatever you said about China, I accept it. It's a great deceiver, it's a demon, it's everything that you say. But from Indian point of view, from Indian perspective, would it not be more realistic, more prudent to engage China instead of containing the Chinese onslaught? After all, whatever we may say, whatever we may delude ourselves into believing that we are a Vishwaguru and whatnot, the fact remains, Chinese economy is 5 times bigger than ours. Chinese army is far, far superior than ours. So, how do we try to even try to contain China? After we engaged with China for the last 30 years without a single bullet being shot, and we managed it. So, isn't it more realistic to engage with China rather than try to contain China from Indian point of view?
I would request the questions to be precise, please.
No, too close to each other. And we have a history of so many differences. And I don't think those differences can be settled in anything which is not like a WTO. Today, there is no discussion with China on a number of issues. And discussions are very difficult. I am aware that discussions have taken place. But wars today are not fought by the size of the armies. Wars are fought in all kinds of places. Someone mentioned on the TV yesterday that Iran and USA are at war with each other. And then he convinced that yes, we are at war with each other. Actual war, without a war being fought. So there are many wars within so many other territories which nations fight.
I think to your question, yes, we need to engage. There are areas where we also have common interests. But we will also contend at the same time. Because we do compete. If you look at the economic effects of engagement on us in terms of this huge deficit in trade and so on, we need to do something about that. We will do both simultaneously. We will compete, we will contend, but we will also cooperate where it serves our interest. I think the only thing is which one in each case, and you're today in a world where in different sectors you'll have to do different things. You will have to pick and choose what you do. When it comes to, say, maritime security, cyber, these are not all the same. Or trade issues, bilateral trade issues, international economic issues. Each one, some you will work together, some you will compete, some you will contend. So I don't think there's a simple formula in today's.
Yeah, I will just add to the point Mr. Menon said. So that's not. And particularly from the economic policy point of view, I think we should engage with China. But while engaging with China, we should be constantly be conscious of the fact that we need to reform our domestic policies. Because if you engage with China, but you haven't reformed your own domestic economic policies in particular, then probably that engagement can work against you.
Any other questions on the floor?
Yeah. See India a bigger threat than Japan?
There's a difference there. Japan, they have a history after the war from Japan. Japan was the one who created Manchukuo and so on. And things like the Nanking Massacre, she has a memory of Japan which is very different from the Chinese memory of India. In terms of potential for the future, the Chinese have always listed you before Japan as the economy that they think. And this is all the way back to Deng Xiaoping meeting Rajiv Gandhi in 1988. So, yes, they see the potential. And when they saw you grow at over 6% for over 30 years, when they saw you show the will in 1998, the will to power, by doing your tests overtly and declaring yourself a nuclear weapon state, they started taking you seriously and dealing very differently with you. So, yes, they see you there. But they are not going to give you the satisfaction of giving you a certificate.
You see, when I started working in telecom, and for some strange reason, I went to different people and there were some regulations, and we started growing at 3 times the growth rate of China ever. So Chinese are very concerned, and they started coming to our offices, they started sitting there, they started inviting us for seminars. How the hell did you do it? You are such silly people. How the hell did you done it? So they are very. So I thought to myself that I owe it to everyone that since I have done Indian reforms in most of the sectors, and I saw what was happening in China, I must write a book in China. And I've said here that was the first reason I decided to write a book. That those people who were there were trying to study us because in one sector we had started moving. So I thought I must write a book, and that is the reason of writing my book. And then there are many sectors the Chinese president came to India at the time of Dr. Manmohan Singh, and he said, मेरे साथ दो लोगों को भेज दीजिए. One was Pawar, and the other one was Narayan Murthy, and he took both of them to China and asked them to set up industries. And both of them set up industries, and they're highly successful industries. But both of them say कि हमारा पूरा फायदा उठाया, हमारी सारी टेक्नोलॉजी चुरा ली, और उसके बाद हमें सिर्फ ₹1 पर 1 पैसा प्रॉफिट बनाने देते हैं, उससे ज़्यादा नहीं, because there is no appeal there, nothing. So I have given a number of sectors here where we are better than China. Milk. Dr. Kurian created an institution. So milk, we are far ahead of China. So wherever we have been able to create institutions, good institutions, we are far ahead of China. Wherever soya, yes. No, there's a growth, and it started in Madhya Pradesh.
Madhya Pradesh was the soya state.
So there is a chart here which shows that soybean we have cut up with China. So wherever we have set up good institutions, we have gone ahead and they have recognized this. And wherever the government started being run by crony capitalists, as in some period which we all recognize in the past, we have gone down the drain.
So my question is to Mr. Menon, although it is for West, Japan, India, for which other country is containing China, if at all?
Today, if you look at containing, and everybody denies that they're trying to contain China, because each of them has huge economic stakes in this relationship. And for the US, frankly, they have huge financial stakes in this. China owns the largest holding of US Treasury bonds outside the US is in China. And they have stakes in Chinese stability, in the stability of the Chinese economy, because they're so codependent. Same is true of Europe, same is true of others. So if you ask anyone, there's nobody who will tell you that they are containing China. But the fact is that they're all trying to work together to make sure that they can have China behave in what they regard as a responsible fashion. If you look at the kind of security, intelligence, defense, other cooperation that all of China's neighbors have started ever since China's phenomenal rise started in this century, as you said. Look at what Japan, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, Australia, look how much more we're doing together. And it's clear, this is a countervailing, balancing response. But containing is not the word that anybody will use.
Now, obviously, I have said containing to provoke. And I have also said that US can't contain them. I have also said Japan cannot contain them, India cannot contain them. I have said role of the US, Japan, India and other democracies. Because democracies are threatened because of Chinese power. And I have given a graph that if we don't do anything, 6.5% growth in China as at present, last year, and 2.5% growth in rest of the world, the Chinese economy will hold 50% of the world's GDP, 80% per population, 50% world's GDP, and a communist state and a feudal state and a military state on top of that, the world will be destroyed.
I see all kinds of signs saying we have to finish now. I think
We can afford one last question.
So one more?
One last question.
One last question.
Good morning, sir. My question is that we have now been able to succeed each time. What is the answer to Chinese deception?
I think I would say that one approach would be, strategic engagement with China, because if you do not engage with China, you shall never be able to understand in which way and how the deception is being played out.
Or read the 36 stratagems, I have them in the book. 36 stratagems, how they deceive the rest of the world, all the time.
Thank you for watching the session from BLF 2020. Kindly subscribe to our channel for more such videos.